at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Nana Akua. I'm in for Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big stories of the day and go in depth. So keeping me company today is Mail Plus columnist Charlie Peters. And here's what else is coming up on the show today. So Extinction Rebellion, the activists are causing traffic chaos after hanging from Tower Bridge to unfurl a banner stating, "End fossil fuels now." Do you have any sympathy with this cause? Chancellor Rishi Sunak is having a taxing time of it over his wife's non-dom status. Is it perfectly reasonable or utterly hypocritical while the rest of us experience a cost of living crisis? We'll speak to former Labour government Minister Dennis McShane. And the winning formula for your waistline is apparently half your height, says new guidance from the health watchdog. We'll get a nutritionist to talk us through all of that. That's what's coming up on We Need to Talk for the next hour. So what do you need to talk about? You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's time to get your GB News headlines.
A very good afternoon to you. It's just gone 2 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, Ukrainian officials say 39 people have been killed. Over 100 have been wounded in a Russian rocket strike on a railway station in East Ukraine. 2 rockets struck the station in the city of Kramatorsk, which was busy at the time with women, children and elderly evacuees. President Zelensky says Russian forces are cynically destroying the civilian population. The Kremlin has denied any involvement in the attack. The governor of the Donetsk region says Russian forces have been firing at civilian infrastructure, including medical facilities. Ukrainian officials warned that it had been impossible to get any humanitarian aid to the city of Mariupol. It comes as the UK Ministry of Defence says Russian forces have fully withdrawn from the north and some, though, of those soldiers are likely now to be moved to fight in the Donbass region. Britain has sanctioned more individuals, including the adult daughters of the Russian President Vladimir Putin. The United States placed similar restrictions on them earlier this week. Now, Britain's also sanctioned the children of Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. The Foreign Office says more than £275 billion of Russian money has now been frozen by coordinated UK and international sanctions. As of Tuesday this week, 12,000 Ukrainians had arrived in the UK. The Home Office says almost 11,000 came under the Ukraine Family Scheme and over 1,000 arrived through the Homes for Ukraine sponsorship programme. Almost 80,000 applications have been received by the Home Office from Ukrainians wanting to come to the UK. So far, just under 41,000 visas have been granted. In some other news now. The man who killed Sabina Nessa has been sentenced to life in prison. He must serve at least 36 years behind bars, having pled guilty to her murder. Koci Selamaj from Eastbourne killed the school teacher in a park in southeast London last September as she walked to meet up with friends. During the sentencing, the judge said it was cowardly of Selamaj to refuse to attend his sentencing, but said he had no power to force him to turn up. Senior Investigating Officer DCI Neil John says it was vital to catch Selamaj before he could attack another victim.
I've described him previously as an evil coward. I maintain that. As a human being, I'm appalled by the level of violence that he inflicted on Sabina. And I think as a police officer, I'm relieved that the team have been able to track, trace, apprehend and prosecute him in a timely manner.
London's Tower Bridge has been reopened after a protest by Extinction Rebellion activists forced its closure for several hours this morning. At least 2 people were arrested after demonstrators suspended themselves from the bridge using cords. They also unfurled a banner that read, "End fossil fuels now." Officers cleared the protesters just before midday. The musician Dizzy Rascal's been given a community order with a 24-week curfew and a 12-month restraining order for assaulting his ex-fiancée. The grime artist, whose real name is Dylan Mills, was found guilty of attacking Cassandra Jones after a trial in March, with a judge concluding he'd been abusive and aggressive. Boris Johnson has failed to rule out another lockdown should a new coronavirus variant appear. Currently, hospital admissions in England due to COVID have reached the highest level since January 2021. Well, speaking to GB News, the Prime Minister said he wouldn't take any options off the table in tackling the virus.
I can't rule out something, Esther. I can't, say that we wouldn't be forced to do non-pharmaceutical interventions again of the kind that we did. I think it would be irresponsible of any leader, in any democracy, to say that they're going to rule out something that could save life.
Well, Boris Johnson was speaking there with the Conservative MPs, Esther McVey and Philip Davies. You can watch the full interview tomorrow on GB News at 10 o'clock. Now some travel updates for you. Airports and airlines have been criticised by the Civil Aviation Authority for failing to recruit enough staff to meet the recent demand for passenger travel. The body's chief executive has condemned disruption experienced by passengers who were trying to get away over the Easter holidays. He says late notice cancellations and excessive delays are distressing for customers, and they also have the potential to impact confidence levels across the industry. Today, Manchester Airport has asked passengers to prepare for long queues and that they should arrive 3 hours before their flight to avoid missing it. You're up to date. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, let's return to Nana.
So you're with me, Nana Akua, on We Need to Talk About on GB News. Right, there's been traffic chaos in central London today after 2 Extinction Rebellion activists abseiled over the side of Tower Bridge and unfurled a huge banner reading, "End fossil fuels now." They said that they deliberately targeted the gateway to the City of London to highlight the infrastructure that supports fossil fuels ahead of further action this weekend. And taxi drivers and office workers have been among those expressing anger and frustration at the disruption the protest is causing to their working day. Well, at least one person has been arrested following the incident. Our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, has been live at the scene throughout the morning and joins us now. Paul, what is the latest?
Yeah, hi, Nana. An update to the number of arrests. This is from the City of London Police. They say that 4 people have been arrested. That is the latest from the City of London Police. No idea whether they've been charged. 2 of those people that were arrested were dangling from the bridge. They attached themselves to the bridge around 7 a.m. this morning via ropes, so they couldn't be hauled up straight away by the police, but they were dangling from the bridge, and it forced the bridge, one of the major bridges in London, probably actually one of the most famous bridges in the world, to be shut, causing traffic chaos on the north and south side of the Thames. This continued for 4 hours. Then around about 10:30, the police moved into position, a combination of police riverboats and the RNLI and police officers from the top of the bridge winching themselves down to the protesters and then helping them to then lower them down onto riverboats, and the protesters were subsequently taken away to be held in police custody. And as you say, the poster that they unveiled across the bridge said "End fossil fuels now." The timing of it, no coincidence, coming in the same week on Monday that we had the report from the UN, which said that governments around the world need to act right now, that long-term strategies are no good without short-term strategies, and that the window for reducing fossil fuel emissions so that the world will only warm by 1.5 degrees Celsius, that window is now closing. So that's why they were specifically using the word now, and also it comes after the government released its energy strategy yesterday, in which it mentioned extracting more oil and gas from the North Sea, building more nuclear power stations, one bit that was welcomed in the report was more offshore wind farms, but there was no commitment towards more onshore wind energy, and there was absolutely no mention of insulating more homes in Britain, which a lot of campaigners say is a no-brainer, given it would in the short term help to reduce the need that we have for energy and also cut fossil fuel emissions.
It's interesting that they left that out. Are we expecting further disruption this weekend?
Well, just to read you a little bit more of that statement, actually, that from Extinction Rebellion, the action has taken place at the gateway to the City of London on the eve of the April Rebellion, it says, which begins tomorrow at 10 a.m. in Hyde Park. This marks a decisive shift in tactics from non-violent civil disobedience to non-violent civil resistance tactics. So that sounds to me like, and I don't know this for certain, but it sounds to me like there's going to be more of this kind of action, maybe not just across the capital, but across the country, given the Extinction Rebellion were also working with an oil protest group to demonstrate outside some of those oil installations across the UK. So potentially more disruption to come within the capital and also across the country.
So all these little groups coming up, Just Stop Oil and all that lot. Listen, Paul, thank you very much for that. That's Paul Hawkins. He's our national reporter. Right, so joining me on the show now is climate activist at Extinction Rebellion and a mechanical engineer, Veryl Rodriguez. Veryl, thank you very much for joining us. Do you not think that there are better ways that Extinction Rebellion could sort of get their message across?
Thanks, Nana, for having me on the show. That's a really good question. I feel like we are in a very dire situation. We've tried everything in the normal way to bring about change, to raise awareness. We saw last year at COP26, we saw leaders from all across the world descending on Scotland. We saw loads of companies who were interested in taking more climate action come to Scotland to discuss what we can do about the climate crisis. And they set goals and they set targets. But what are we seeing from that? We're seeing none of those targets being met. In fact, the government is backtracking on its net zero targets by investing more into fossil fuels. They've got about 40 new oil and gas projects in their pipelines. And yeah, just as Paul mentioned, they're starting to also give more funding for the North Sea oil and gas projects as well. And they're even exploring fracking out of everything. So we are seeing a complete U-turn in what they said at COP26 last year. I just want to say, so the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, who's the executive director, said that if governments are serious about the climate crisis, there can be no further investments into fossil fuels this year. And he said that last year. And this year, we are carrying on with fossil fuels. We can't afford this. We are seeing more and more extreme weather events happening all across the world right now. And I've got family in India, Goa, and I visit them once a year, and I've experienced the weather getting worse. Yeah. I've seen the beaches starting to disappear.
We all have, and actually, Veryl, it does vary. But I want to ask you a few questions then, because I mean, the government are moving towards removing fossil fuels. None of us want to use them, but in the process of doing that, you still have to use them to move to the next process. And saying now seems somewhat unrealistic. I mean, first of all, I mean, I've got a little quiz question for you then, just to see, because you're talking about this so eloquently. Do you know how fossil fuels come about?
Yeah, so fossil fuels have to be drilled from the ground, and they're mainly.
Do you know how they're actually made? I mean, we know they're drilled from the ground or fracked or whatever, but do you actually know how the Earth creates fossil fuels?
They basically come. They're kind of like they've been in the ground for ages, and they have basically formed over millions of years, mainly from all the organic matter in the past. But I think
what do you mean by that? Then? I'm just thinking what you know, because you're protesting about it. I'm just wondering what you know about them. So shall I tell you what they come from? Because you were saying, but you're not quite there. I mean, obviously they're a hydrocarbon, and they're actually formed from the remains of dead plants and animals. That's how the fossil fuels. So they're now obviously naturally occurring. I've got another question for you though. Okay, so you want to end this fossil fuel business now, and you're saying now, as in like tomorrow, I presume that means. So I want to ask, the very bridge that you're campaigning on is probably made out of steel and iron. So can you actually make fossil-free steel?
Yes, we can, and there are solutions. There are solutions for that. There are already solutions for that. But what I'm
But
going
are
to get
you
across
aware
is
that you can't actually make it to scale? So you're saying end it now. Right now, we do not have the technology to make that steel to scale right now, but we are working on it, as you said. So I'm just looking at how realistic what you're asking for, because you're saying now. It doesn't seem realistic to me. All right, then what about, OK, so the bridge is probably constructed with parts, things like cement, OK? So can you make cement without coal, which is a fossil fuel?
I think going back to your question, what we're asking about when you're referring to now, what we're saying is we need to end further investments into fossil fuels. We need to end further subsidies, and we need to stop funding all future projects. It's a simple ask. That's all we're asking for now. Because burning fossil fuels is causing emissions to rise rapidly, which is causing chaos all across the world. And what's going to come 10 years from now is going to be unimaginable. That's the message that we're trying to send to the government.
See, the thing is, Veryl, we're already moving that towards it. But in order to stop our reliance on people like Vladimir Putin, who's currently waging war on a complete, it seems like somewhat of a genocide, we are upping at the ante so that we produce our own fuels ourselves. We're reducing our carbon emissions by not taking that fuel from elsewhere. In the meantime, whilst we move to renewable energy sources, which is exactly what you're after. So we're all a little bit confused as to why you're bothering this. And by the way, you can actually make cement without coal, but if you do it, you still get roughly the same amount of CO2 emissions anyway. So just for your thank you very much, Veryl. That's Veryl Rodriguez. He is a mechanical engineer and part of Extinction Rebellion. All right, let's go over to joining me now is broadcaster and car dealer, although I know he doesn't like to be called that, Danny Kelly. Hello, Danny Kelly, car dealer. Yeah, dodging the dibble. Listen, talk to me about this. Danny, it's nice to talk to you on this. We need to talk.
Sure. Listening to Veryl, he is the embodiment of everything that is wrong with the public relations of Extinction Rebellion. I was reading an article today where one of his peers at Extinction Rebellion, or Just Stop Oil, who glued himself to an oil trucker in the West Midlands to prevent diesel and unleaded being delivered to the petrol stations. By the way, they're very successful. The queues around Leamington and Warwick, they've run out of diesel, they've been punch-ups at the pumps. And he compared himself, this guy, to a freedom fighter in Ukraine, firing AK-47 rounds at the Red Army, the advancing Red Army of Vladimir Putin. And this is how detached people like Veryl and their views are from the average, ordinary man and woman in the street. There's a real here and now crisis. How the hell does Veryl expect pensioners to heat their homes up when they're living on the breadline, when the price of gas and electricity is shooting through the roof? Boris Johnson needs to make us less dependent on Vladimir Putin. Thankfully, we're only 4 or 5% dependent on Vladimir Putin for oil and gas, unlike Germany, which is more heavily in bed with Putin when it comes to gas. If I was a Bobby on the beat in London this morning, I'd quite simply ask my superintendent to see if I could get some garden shears and cut those two doomsday cult-like idiots off Tower Bridge. They've got a soft landing, get a boat underneath them to drag them out of the Thames and then process them that way. The average man and woman, you are losing them, Veryl. With your views, you are losing the hearts and minds of the average man and woman who are doing their best, Veryl, to cut down on CO2. I'm a car dealer. More and more people are turning away from petrol and diesel, Veryl. They're going electric, mate. You're losing the battle, the PR battle. Trust me.
I mean, and obviously Veryl is talking about tomorrow instead of today, which is all very well. But he's saying they won't be tomorrow if we don't look at things today. I mean, what would you say to that?
I would say that they are the ramblings of a madman who, similarly, in 1993, for those of us old enough, may remember the Waco siege with the Branch Davidians and their master, the second coming of Christ, a fellow called David Koresh. You are dealing with people who are brainwashed. You cannot argue against them because all they will they'll throw back at you. So you want the planet to burn, do you? And it's a difficult argument to come back at them with. I would urge Veryl. He mentioned that he has relatives in India. I would urge him to go to India and protest there. They're responsible for far more, a disproportionately high amount compared to the minuscule 1% CO2 emissions that the British Isles are responsible for. Go to China, Veryl. You're losing the hearts and minds, mate. I'd love to see him go over to India. Get a plane full over there, although they won't fly. Get them on a ferry or something, and go and protest in India, because that's where the real harm is being done.
Well, I suppose you could say that, although Verrill may potentially argue that we did our bit in the Industrial Revolution many years ago, and so it's their turn, which is not much.
That's crazy.
But obviously we don't advocate any violence either, so we wouldn't want to cut them off the ropes and they land a soft landing on a boat. But Danny, take your point. Danny, thank you so much for talking to us. That's Danny Kelly. He's a broadcaster and a used car dealer. Right, so joining me in the studio to look at the stories of the day is writer and broadcaster Charlie Peters. Charlie, thank you so much for joining us. So what's your position on these sort of protests?
Well, I think, they've been going on for ages now, haven't they? And we haven't really effectively dealt with them at any point. The police struggled enormously last year, in part because they don't have sufficient resources to deal with these people. But I mean, they've been fostered by the government. I mean, everyone goes on about how they're out of touch with the average man and woman. It doesn't matter. This is a complete cope. Extinction Rebellion, their ideas, their ideology is represented at the peak of government and the international order. The net zero agenda is the strategy of global governments. And so are they out of touch with people? Sure, but I mean, they're winning.
Who, the protesters are winning or the government?
No, the protesters are winning, absolutely. I mean,
but wouldn't you say that we're going that way anyway? And it's not really, I mean, Boris Johnson's always been quite clear about his net zero aspirations. So can you see the point of these people protesting?
I don't agree with their perspective. I'm in favour of fossil fuels. I'm in favour of India having the industrial revolution, and indeed, I'm in favour of advancements for all struggling countries around the world. But it's the case that the governments that reject Extinction Rebellion in their PR statements do exactly what they want, but at a slower pace. Extinction Rebellion wants nothing by 2030. We say, OK, how about 2050? There's no actual opposition to their ideas, and as Danny rightly says, sufficiently a doomsday cult. That's what we're dealing with.
There doesn't seem to be any point to them. We've already decided that we want to be more sustainable, so why they're doing that? We know we need to do it quickly. Vladimir Putin, if anything, is speeding things up. But it just doesn't make sense to me. But we'll talk more, Charlie, throughout the show. Now, as ever, I really want to get your views as well. Does this sort of protest, does it do more harm than good for the cause? You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or send me a tweet at GBNews so I know what the nation is actually thinking on. Right, so you're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is, of course, GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. It's just coming up to 22 minutes after 2 o'clock and still to come, 36 years minimum sentence for the man who murdered school teacher Sabina Nessa. We'll have reaction. Now, though, it's time to check out the weather.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. The weekend will be fine and dry for most, and that's what we've got today. It's still pretty cold out there, however. The wind's perhaps not quite as strong as the past couple of days. And it's not dry and fine everywhere. This area of low pressure has been scooting its way up through the channel, bringing some wet conditions along the south coast. Certainly a pretty grim day across the Channel Isles, wet and at times quite windy here. But that rain is edging away from the south coast. Many places dry and bright. We still have a cold wind blowing, particularly across the northeast, where we'll see some sleet showers, some snow over the hills. A few rain showers developing across southern England this afternoon as that wetter weather clears away. And for many, as I said, it's dry and it's bright. Temperatures below average for the time of year, still feeling pretty chilly, but out of the breeze, we might get up to 13 Celsius in the south. That wind, though, is still strong and still cold across the northeast. Still further snow showers over the high ground here into low levels. Showers could mean some icy conditions as well. The potential for a few showers across the southeast during the evening and overnight, but for many it becomes dry and clear, and temperatures certainly across northern Britain, much of Wales will drop in rural areas down below freezing. So again, it could be icy across northeast Scotland as the showers keep coming in here on Saturday. A few showers dotted around elsewhere, parts of Wales and particularly northwest Scotland's turning a little wetter through the day. But for the vast majority, it's another dry, bright day with some good spells of sunshine, but it is still on the chilly side with temperatures struggling to get much beyond double figures, maybe 13 across the south. But again, those winds are lighter than they have been over recent days. Light winds and clear skies will allow frost to form for many as we head through Saturday night and into Sunday. Still some wet weather across Scotland, still some sleet and snow mixed in here. For many, Sunday starts with a frost, but again dry and bright, although it will cloud over in the west later. Maybe a few spots of rain for Northern Ireland. Signs of things getting warmer next week.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Hello, good afternoon. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. I'm in for Alex, but I will be back for my show at 4 o'clock, so stay with me. But this is We Need to Talk. Now, we move on to this horrendous story. I mean, it's the man who murdered school teacher Sabina Nessa has been described as evil, as an evil sexual predator, as he was sentenced to life with a minimum term of at least 36 years. Koci Selamaj travelled to London from the south coast with the intention of carrying out an attack on a random woman last September. He targeted Sabina Nessa as she walked through a park in Kidbrooke, southeast London, to meet a friend. GBNews London reporter Alex Porter reports.
On the 17th of September, the day of Sabina Nessa's murder, Selamaj checked into the Grand Hotel in Eastbourne after propositioning his estranged wife for sex in the car park. She refused. Hotel staff found his behaviour strange and called the police, but no action was taken. Selamaj later drove around 70 miles to Kidbrooke in southeast London. He has no known connection to the area. He saw Sabina Nessa walking through the park and struck her with a metal emergency traffic triangle around 34 times and then killed her by asphyxiation. A brutal killing which will forever haunt her family.
We had lost our sister. My parents had lost their daughter.
The murder took place 6 months after the killing of Sarah Everard and raised serious questions over women's safety in London. The police say Selamaj's killing of Sabina Nessa was sexually motivated. During the trial, it also emerged that Selamaj's wife had experienced domestic violence.
We spoke to his wife, who was clearly shocked and very upset by all of this. And it was during them quite sensitive interviews that she disclosed to police that she'd been previously assaulted by him, actually throttled on 3 separate occasions, matters which had not been previously reported to the police.
Police say Selamaj had no criminal record in the UK, nor in Albania, where he was from. And for someone to suddenly kill in this way is highly unusual. But today, justice is finally served for the murder of Sabina Nessa, a much-loved teacher described by her family as kind, generous, loving and determined. Alice Porter, GB News.
Right, so joining me now on the show is domestic violence survivor and campaigner Zoe Dronfield. Zoe, welcome to the programme. Now, Selamaj's wife has spoken publicly about how he attempted to strangle her a number of times in the weeks before this attack, and his behaviour this sort of behaviour can escalate, can't it?
I mean, it's interesting that he's done this before, because it's like what I've always said. It's never a one-off event, and even in that report there, it said that it's unusual for somebody to just murder somebody out of the blue. Well, they don't do that. There is always other incidents coming, leading up to that. So I mean, it's just horrific. 36 years doesn't seem long enough, and they've got a lifetime of grief ahead of them, the family of Sabina.
Is there enough support for people who are being domestically abused?
Well, I mean, that in itself proves that, this poor lady had been in a marriage with him and been throttled 3 times, and obviously had no idea where to go for support. And this is why we must keep having the discussion, and we must keep talking about it, and we must keep signposting women to the correct places to get the support that they need. Had this have been raised with police, he may well have been flagged. And something that I've gone on about for many, many years now is a serial register, and to capture these offenders on a register. Unfortunately, in this incident, he would have probably slipped the net, though, because the reports weren't made to the police.
So what can women do briefly to try and get support and help, and where are the main avenues of support? Have you got any recommendations of what women should do if they're in this situation? Because bear in mind, I mean, his wife has to live with him.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, going to the police isn't what you want to do. Maybe you're a bit fearful of the authorities, but there's specialist charities out there. You've got the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, and if you do go to the police, you're not getting the response that you want, then do go to these charities, because they specialise in domestic abuse and can help you to leave a relationship safely. And you do need a safety plan. Leaving a relationship is often the most difficult and dangerous time. And actually, the fact that he was spurned by his wife before the murder, it doesn't surprise me at all. It seems like male violence is often triggered by being spurned by a female.
Well, listen, Zoe, thank you so much for that. You take care. That's Zoe Dronfield. She's a domestic abuse survivor and campaigner. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Still to come, Rishi Sunak's having a taxing time. We'll ask if it's fair that the Chancellor's wife has non-dom status, shielding her from UK taxes. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2:32. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date. Ukrainian officials say 39 people have been killed, over 100 have been wounded in a Russian rocket strike on a railway station in eastern Ukraine. 2 rockets struck the station in the city of Kramatorsk, which was busy at the time with women, children and elderly evacuees. President Zelensky says Russian forces are cynically destroying the civilian population. The Kremlin have denied any involvement in the attack. The man who killed Sabina Nessa has been sentenced to life in prison. He must serve at least 36 years behind bars after pleading guilty to her murder. Koci Selamaj from Eastbourne killed the schoolteacher in a park in southeast London last September as she walked to meet up with friends. During the sentencing, the judge said it was cowardly of Selamaj to refuse to attend, but he said he had no power to force him. London's Tower Bridge has reopened after a protest by Extinction Rebellion activists forced its closure for several hours this morning. At least 2 people were arrested after demonstrators suspended themselves from the bridge using cords. They also unfurled a banner that read, "End fossil fuels now." Officers cleared the protests before midday. The musician Dizzy Rascal has been given a community order with a 24-week curfew and a 12-month restraining order for assaulting his ex-fiancée. The grime artist, whose real name is Dylan Mills, was found guilty of attacking Cassandra Jones after a trial in March. A judge concluded he'd been abusive and aggressive. 3-time Wimbledon champion Boris Becker has been found guilty of 4 charges under the Insolvency Act by a jury at Southwark Crown Court. The charges relating to his 2017 bankruptcy included the removal of property, 2 counts of failing to disclose estate and concealing debt. He was acquitted of a further 20 counts. He's been bailed ahead of sentencing later this month. You're up to date now on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Don't go anywhere. Nana will be back shortly.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
So if you just tune in, where have you been? This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and it's just coming up to 37 minutes after 2 o'clock. I will be doing my show at 4 as well. But it's great to have your company. I'm in for Alex Phillips. Now, the Chancellor's tax headlines continue. Today, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has said that Rishi Sunak must come clean about his family's tax affairs. It was revealed this week that his Indian heiress wife has non-domiciled status. Akshata Murthy is reportedly richer than the Queen. But she's actually sheltered from paying taxes in the UK because of her status. So joining me now in the studio is the former Minister of State for Europe, Dennis Buckshane, and also Charlie Peters. He's also here. Right, so I'm going to start with you, of course, Dennis, and thank you so much for joining me. So Rishi Sunak's wife, what's your take on the whole situation?
The family fortune is bigger than that of Her Majesty, but there's a big difference. The Queen pays taxes. And I just don't understand how Rishi Sunak just shows his incredible inexperience as a politician. He's a very brilliant guy, head boy of Winchester, reserve place at New College, Oxford, made a fortune in the United States, and a lovely marriage to obviously a very nice, incredibly rich Indian lady. And then he comes home, decides he wants to play at politics, and doesn't even pass the first base test. I mean, the story that interests me is, while he was Chancellor, he was still hanging on to a green card. Now, if you know anything about America, that's the most prized possession. It gives you virtually the right to live and work in America all your life. But number one, you pay taxes in America. Number two, you say, I'm working principally in America. And I don't want to say he wasn't telling the truth, but we need to know about that. He's hiding all that as well. It's a disaster for
But you're calling it naivety, but you're letting him...
No, hey.
Because you're saying that, it sounds like you're letting him off the hook. He would have known.
I'm not letting him off the hook. It is not naivety. He's a very he's probably the most intellectually qualified MP, certainly in this government. I mean, compared to Nadine Dorries, for example, without wishing to be unkind or in any way sexist.
I wouldn't if I were
He was...
Don't be sexist.
He was... Rishi Sunak as just a disaster. The idea that anybody would vote for him or put him up to be PM if you're a Tory MP is now for the birds.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I'm surprised that anyone would have thought that. I mean, I think the overview is that he is naive because of his, he hasn't had much experience, but his policies are also a bit incompetent. What's your take, Charlie?
Well, Nadine Dorries might not be as intellectual as Rishi Sunak, but she knows the rules of the game. She knows how to play politics, and she's a very savvy operator in that arena. Mr. Sunak clearly is not. He doesn't know, as you said, the first rule of the game that he's playing. And consequently, he's put himself in a position where that youthful gleam that propelled him to stardom, plus a few billions of pounds chucked at the taxpayer, is proving to be his undoing. He doesn't understand what he's doing.
Well, he's saying it's unfair to go after his wife, really, and to talk about her in this way, and that she shouldn't be included
This is, I think, a kind of lazy, it feels like a lefty kind of deflection, don't be sexist kind of thing. I mean, come on, you set the rules for the non-dom situation. He can't set the rules and also benefit them in an untransparent way.
Nana, two tiny points. Number one, I'm listening to all this Tory guff. How dare you attack the wife? Did any of them say that when they crucified Sherry Booth? They made her life miserable. The Daily Mail did, the Daily Telegraph did, inquiring about children's vaccinations, her own income. They tried to destroy her. I don't remember a single Conservative saying, oh, you can't attack her because she's a woman. Number two is, Charlie's a very erudite person, but Julius Caesar, you remember him? He was a kind of Boris Johnson of the time Caesar. In the Roman Empire.
Brutus, falls,
that's right, Well, anyway, like Boris, he wanted to dump a wife and marry a much richer, younger woman. And he had to invent excuses why he was getting rid of the old wife. And he said he accused her of sleeping with other men, the usual Roman problem. Well, it's quite, usually in Roman times, it was the men who slept with other men. But he said she must be... Caesar's wife must be purer than anyone else. So I'm afraid you've been lumbered for 2,000 years. If you're in politics and there's a problem with Mrs. Caesar or Mrs. Sunak, then I'm afraid you have to take it on the chin. And instead of which, Mr. Sunak seems to be digging himself into deeper and deeper holes.
What about his policies, though? I mean, do this awful national insurance hike, a lot of the taxes that have come in now, do you think that that's why people are actually kind of exposing his, in a sense, hypocrisy? You're creating things that you're not even going to be paying.
Well, there's a very clear tension with the Prime Minister. He wants, like, a sort of an old tax and spend, middle-of-the-road Tory to keep the spending taps on. The ultra-hard-line, ideological, liberal economists in the Treasury want to start balancing the books again. We've had the 2 years of the pandemic where, like every other country in the world, America, every European country, we've simply thrown money at keeping people in work, subsidising. We've let national debt soar. We've allowed lots and lots of corrupt purchases of PPE. But some other countries, I mean, I'm not picking on Britain. And it's so easy to be popular. I mean, do you remember he even gave us all half-price meals?
Well, he out to help out, but he only helped out COVID.
Now, the Treasury is saying to him, Chancellor, I'm very sorry, this can't continue any longer. You've got to bring order back into the public finances. So he's massively raising tax, national insurance charges, cutting hospital money for hospitals, and people are getting really upset when we've got more food banks than we have McDonald's. We've got the eating problem. In France, President Macron says no heating bill will go above 4% this year. Mr. Sunak saying, oh, those energy firms, we've got to let them make their billions and their CEOs make their double plus billions. Their friends us. They're a Tory creation, privatised energy firms. I'm not going to touch them. So suddenly people are calling on to the fact is he's not a very good chancellor.
What should he have done then, in your view?
Well, I think very simply, certainly protect the poor. I mean, this idea that people literally, the story of old people having to put on 3 jumpers and overcoats to go to bed, people unable to cook more than 1 warm meal every second day for their children, shames us in Britain, while you've got not Mr. Sunak himself, but so many people making so many windfall tax profits and personal enrichment. We need a slightly fairer society.
And Charlie, your view? finally, his policies?
Well, his policies clearly are incapable. We're facing a cost of living crisis that is certainly, and for many people who are struggling at the moment, is going to be unimaginably difficult, and it will be for coming years. But just going back onto the broader discussion about his kind of reaction to this non-dom situation, the central failure of this is his whole argument. Oh, she's an Indian national, so he doesn't have to pay tax. What we're starting to see from this politician, I think, is a little bit of the Johnson-style red herring, lie, dissuade, push away to avoid criticism rather than honesty and appreciating that you've tried to pull a blinder on us and it's not worked.
Charlie, well, I wouldn't say, but he wouldn't say he was lying though, because he's
trying to mislead us. He's trying to mislead us.
Avoid the lie.
Avoiding. But he isn't lying.
I earn some money on the continent. Talks, articles, not a lot. But it all goes straight to my accountant here, and I pay the tax here in England.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I do not have Mr. Sunak or Mrs. Sunak's wealth. And I think, if Rishi can't understand that, he's in the wrong job.
He's in the wrong job if he doesn't understand it. Well, thank you very much to Dennis McShane, former Minister of State for Europe, and also my guest, Charlie Peters, who will remain with us. He's the columnist at the Mail Plus. Well, I want to know if you think that it's fair that the Chancellor's wife has non-dom status, shielding her from UK taxes. Should she be paying more tax here, given that she lives at number 10? Which is next door to the Prime Minister. Nothing like rubbing salt into the wound. All you have to do is email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews so that I can hear your thoughts. So now we move on to this story. And of course, again, a horrendous story. Israel security forces have shot dead a Palestinian man who killed 2 people in Tel Aviv bar. It followed a manhunt through the city. The bar attack was the latest in a string of deadly street assaults that have killed 13 people. So joining me live from Tel Aviv is Jotam Confino, who's a journalist at the Hertz Jotam. So, Jotam, tell us a bit more about what's gone on there.
A purely chaotic scene in Tel Aviv yesterday when the 28-year-old Palestinian man from the West Bank decided to open fire at a bar in downtown Tel Aviv, and it was really one of the busiest nights. Thursday night is usually the busiest night in Tel Aviv, and he killed 2 people, as you mentioned, and multiple others were injured and taken away from the scene. And afterwards, a chaotic scene unfolded throughout the city, because normally in terrorist attacks like this, the Israeli security forces usually manage to neutralize the terrorists relatively shortly after. This time around, it took them 9 hours. So you can imagine a massive city with a terrorist on the loose and 1,000 troops, both police and military and elite forces from the military, hunting down this terrorist while civilians are on the street being told to go inside. But of course, some don't really know what to do. They're afraid. They're caught far away from their home. So a purely chaotic scene, which was also covered live on TV, which is unprecedented. The local TV channels were literally behind the elite forces as they went from building to building to hunt down this terrorist, something I have never seen in the many years that I've lived here. After 9 hours, they found him 4 kilometers away from the scene. They shot and killed him. He was hiding near a mosque south of Tel Aviv. And now, of course, they're on high alert, and they are expecting more attacks to come, unfortunately.
And the reasoning for these what's triggering these sort of attacks on civilians, and when is it likely to end, if at all there is a view that there'll be?
It's a good question. First of all, we have to remember that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict isn't going anywhere just because we don't hear about it so much in the news on a daily basis. The conflict is ongoing. The 4 attacks we've had so far are different. The 2 first terrorist attacks that happened about 2 weeks ago were inspired by Islamic State, and they were committed by Arab Israelis, which means that they're Israeli citizens, and it makes it all the more difficult for the Israeli intelligence agencies to track them down. The 2 later attacks, the one we saw yesterday and the one we saw a week ago, were committed by Palestinians coming from the West Bank. So they aren't coordinated. It's not like the Intifada back in the early 2000s. It's not orchestrated by Hamas or Islamic Jihad, the 2 terror organizations that operate in Gaza. They aren't behind it. They're praising the attacks and they're welcoming it, but they aren't orchestrating it, which means it's lone wolf attacks. It's copycat attacks, as we call them. Whenever someone sees someone carrying out an attack successfully, so to say, and murdering people, other people will be inspired. And this is what we're seeing now. And this is why the Israeli military and the defense establishment in general are very, very worried, because they can't track them down. It's very difficult for them to foresee when the next attack will happen. They arrested 200 people since yesterday. And this means that the hunt is ongoing and the attacks will likely continue, unfortunately.
It's very, very, very unfortunate. Jotam, thank you very much for joining us. That's Jotam Confino. He's a journalist at the Hertz. Right, and lots of you have been getting in touch with your views throughout the programme about the Extinction Rebellion protests. Let's have a look at what we've been saying. Pauline says, we don't agree with the protesters. They should spend their time planting some trees around the UK and sorting out all the trees being chopped down in the Amazon. Let's see, Alan says, I just saw 20 police watching 10 protesters block the motorway. I believe blocking the motorway is both a criminal offence and potential civil wrong as well. I then saw 5 police eventually carrying away a protester with 2 more walking behind them. Excuse me. Jeff says all these demonstrators should be arrested immediately before they start more antisocial activities. Get them into a court that has a policy to protect the public and fine them to the level that will pay for all the expenses incurred by the police. And Janice says, do these oil rebellion people actually know the products that are made from oil? Well, that's the thing. That's why I thought I'd question him, Janice, because they don't seem to know that half the things they're talking about, I mean, to end fossil fuel usage right now, which is what they're saying, or to end new investment right now, would mean that we'd probably have to rely more on Vladimir Putin, and they've got no jurisdiction over him, have they? So they can't stop him from producing it. So you're better off allowing us to carry on, finish what we're doing, then go to renewable. I mean, I don't really understand why they're bothering with it. Now, let's move on. I've had my little rant. But the winning formula now, let's talk about a healthy life, is not a healthy wife. No, it's for your waistline, actually, to measure half your height. Now, that is according to the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, which says that the rule applies to adults with a body mass index under 35. So if you're 5'5", you might want a waist of 32.5 inches or less. They say that it's necessary. It isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all approach, as we all carry weight differently, but it's a good starting point. So joining me now on the show is nutritionist Amanda Ursel. Amanda, welcome. It's nice to finally see you. I've spoken to you many a time on radio, but now here we are, live on TV and, of course, online and on digital radio, if you're listening via that. But Amanda, what's your reaction to this report? Did you already know this?
Well, yeah, I think nutritionists did generally know that using the your circumference of your waist and your height is a really good kind of adjunct to the body mass index measurement, which we already use. So to some extent, it's not really new news, but it is good that NICE are taking it seriously and they have these recommendations now, because I think one point they make is that it's actually a really simple thing for people to do themselves. Although I must admit, I was kind of reading about exactly where to measure your waist, because you have to take the bit below your rib and above your hip and then take the middle bit, but you're not allowed to suck your tummy in. You have to let it all hang out as you're doing your measurement. So you can't go and then measure your waist. You have to do it with your tummy out. So, and I think, I was just looking at my own, I had to do that sort of conversion for your height. So 5'5", I was converting it into inches, and what was that, and compared to my waist. So I think, it's not too difficult to do, where BMI can get a bit tricky with the calculations. So, and I think, the thing is, Nana, what it's easy to forget is that fat doesn't just sit there inside your body. It's not like the fat in your butter dish or in your margarine. It's actually very active in your body, and it sort of wraps itself around your internal organs, and it does stuff when it's there. It sort of spews out metabolites which go into your liver and encourage your liver to make more cholesterol, which is bad for your heart. It affects the way we process blood in our sugar in our blood by affecting our insulin levels. So this fat that's sitting around our organs isn't just inert, it's doing stuff. And that's why it's really important to take the central obesity quite seriously. It does have a different role to the stuff that sits on our bottoms, basically.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because actually, and the other side of it is that your body actually needs fat, so you need to consume fat. So in some respects, you don't want to give out too much of the wrong message to people. But yeah, that's a simple measure, isn't it? You've got to convert things here and there. But yeah, it makes sense. Obviously, there are a lot of health risks of carrying too much fat. What is the biggest health risk with obesity, in your view?
Well, I mean, it's so difficult to say because it does carry all these different associated risks. I mean, this whole idea of focusing on central adiposity, central fat, I think is one of the most serious because it does actually have this link to increased risk of heart disease and type 2 diabetes. But then, of course, obviously, there are other things like, if we're carrying a lot of extra body weight, then it does affect our mobility. So our knee joints, our hip joints, our ability to move around. And,
Amanda, we're running out of time. That's why I asked for just one. She's got a list, I know. And there are a list, really, as long as your arm. Amanda Ursel, thank you very much for joining me, and thank you for your views. That's Amanda Ursel. Right, so Charlie, what do you think about that? I mean, come on, is this more nanny state evidence? Didn't we know this already? You knew that if you're fat, you're more likely to get this, that and the other. Do we need this measure?
I think most people don't know when things are bad.
Do you think?
I think people will con themselves into believing they're healthy when they're not. And speaking of which, I'm actually starving, having watched the graphic overlay during that interview. Oh, that burger looked good.
I wanted the one on the right. I was thinking, I'll take the one on the right. That's a lot bigger.
Exciting sauce. It looked brilliant. I want a bit of that. Look, I think generally speaking, this country needs to get healthier. One of the reasons why I think we had quite a poor response to COVID-19 wasn't entirely due to the government's incompetence in the beginning, but also because we're struggling with our weight.
Well, we're struggling with our weight. I'm not, and I love my food. I'm sorry, but I'm whatever. Listen, I tell you what, make sure you join me at 4 for my show, Nana Akua. That is it from me. So I'll be back later, the usual time. Coming up, though, it's the briefing with Arlene Foster. But first, let's get some weather.
Hello again, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A fine, dry weekend for most. Just don't expect it to be too warm. It's going to be fairly chilly, particularly so in the mornings. This is the bigger picture. We're between low and high pressure, with one low to the south that's made for a very wet day over the Channel Islands and some very windy conditions across France. But that's scooting away, and we've got northerly winds still. Not as strong as recent days, but still bringing a chill and still bringing showers over parts of England and Wales. Rain showers primarily, but some hail mixed in. Sleet and snow in the showers over northern Scotland, where it may just turn icy. For most, though, the night becomes dry and clear and cold. Temperatures close to freezing in urban areas. Rural spots will be a touch below. So, yes, a cold, frosty start to the weekend. Still a few showers over northern Scotland, and we'll see cloud increasing across the Western Isles with some more showers coming in here later on. Snow over the Highlands, perhaps down to lower levels. A sprinkling showers for England and Wales, maybe Northern Ireland, but for most it's a dry and a bright day. But it is still chilly, temperatures below average for the time of year, but the winds are continuing to ease down, so it won't feel quite as cold as the past couple of days. It'll turn quite cold on Saturday night. Again, largely clear skies, still some wintry showers over northern Scotland, so again, it could be a little icy here, but generally it's a frosty but fine start to Sunday. Plenty of sunshine on offer on Sunday. Some cloud will develop through the day. Certainly for Northern Ireland, it's likely to turn grey with the threat of a bit of patchy rain coming in here by the end of the day. But for most, it'll be dry and fine. Again, a cold start by the afternoon, double figures maybe into the teens across parts of the south where we see some sunshine. And again, the winds will be light. However, that cloud coming into Northern Ireland heralds something of a change into next week. Weather fronts bringing cloud and some showers, but also coming up from the south. So after a cold few days, it does look milder next week.
Tomorrow from 10 a.m, get set for a GB News exclusive interview with Prime Minister Boris Johnson as two of his most rebellious MPs put him on the spot. Brexit, COVID, and now the reality of war. How does the Prime Minister look back on the past 2 years? And what can he say about having been so close to death?
I then had a pretty groggy night and went down even lower.
An exclusive interview with Prime Minister Boris Johnson tomorrow from 10 a.m on GB News.